Perhaps one of the biggest, literally and figuratively, legends of all time is the lost continent of Atlantis. There are various stories that have been written and created about Atlantis. The debate still rages, even more so now, as to if it actually existed or was simply a metaphor used by Plato. Atlantis has become part of our obsession with aliens visiting the Earth. It's become a part of a spiritual, New Age belief that crosses into reincarnation. It's also part of the Nazi parties delving into the occult. The truth of the matter is, Atlantis and all the things it represents has grown beyond anything we could have ever imagined. It's more than a lost city, and in this episode of Mytheries, we're going to explore the truth and fiction of Atlantis. In or around 360 BC, Plato wrote about Atlantis, creating it as an enemy for Athens in his writings. Atlantis came to a bad end when it fell out of favor with the gods and was sunk beneath the waves. The idea of Atlantis caught on and inspired many writers with ideas of what such a place could be. And what's interesting is that an idea was most likely all it really was. There's no real evidence that Atlantis ever truly existed anywhere else other than in Plato's mind. That didn't stop the imaginations and theories from growing over millennia, and Atlantis becoming something much more than the Greek writer ever would have expected it to be. The truth of Atlantis was debated as far back as Plato himself. There were those who believed it completely to be a myth, devised by Plato to be used as a sort of cautionary tale. But others, even back then, believed that it was inspired by a real place and real tragedy. The description by Plato of the land being in front of the Pillars of Hercules had scholars trying to decipher where it might be. There were historians who thought it might be at the Gulf of Laconia, in Greece for one example. As time moved on, there were various texts written about Atlantis, each using the story to further their own agenda. Early Christians blamed pagans for the destruction of the city, much like Sodom was smited by God for wickedness and wiped from the planet. I personally wonder if some of this didn't influence the tale of Noah and the flood, but that's just my theory. I mean, how many ancient floods and smiting by God can there be around that time? In the 600s, the mapmaker Cosmas tried using Atlantis as proof of his flat earth theory. Leading into more modern takes on the story, many explorers, after the discovery of the American lands, decided that this new world was actually what was considered Atlantis, even though we weren't submerged underwater. This included famous notables like Francis Bacon. This belief that Atlantis was a real place began to grow in earnest as the belief in Atlantis started mixing together with the idea of it. As the world grew bigger, so did the theories, and size of Atlantis. More and more people began to believe that Atlantis was in fact part of a bigger landmass that broke off from the rest. This isn't as far-fetched as you'd think when you look at the idea of Pangaea. Pangaea is a supercontinent, a massive land that was part of the Earth 335 million years ago. Over millennia, it was torn into smaller landmasses. Further proof of this is shown due to fossils found in very different locations. Similar fossils of flora and bones were discovered in South Africa, as well as Antarctica. What this means is it's possible that the inspiration for Atlantis could come from a story given to Plato about such an event. Atlantis has some troubling connotations as well, and its story has become a tool for some disturbing claims. One has to do with, quote-unquote, primitive cultures, notably the Mayan cultures of Mexico and Central America. It's something that you will see hinted at during various alien astronaut series and specials. Ancient cultures weren't advanced enough to make what they made alone. They are just too primitive and simply too different. One theory is that these cultures were helped along by survivors of Atlantis, a far more advanced people and, of course, not so different. These theories by pseudo-archaeologists have gone far beyond Atlantis, with most of them stating these people of times and places like ancient Egypt couldn't have created wonders like the pyramids or the Sphinx without some sort of cosmic help. They just weren't advanced enough. Enter Atlantis, which is now also tied to aliens as well due to having an advanced culture. With the destruction of Atlantis, which could have been tied to an alien involvement, perhaps they weren't pleased with how things were progressing and their choices happening there. The survivors of the event spread out amongst the world and helped others build the amazing achievements we see today. From this, enter the root race theory, an idea from theosophist Helena Blavatsky. Theosophy is a religious belief that borrows from a few different religions, but the root race theory, which is part of the belief system, actually delves into Atlantis. The root race theory believes that there are 7 races coming together for Earth. We've already seen 5 of these races, with the most recent of these being Aryan. I'll let you guess who really dug this theory. If you guessed the Nazis, you'd be right. It's not hard to see why when Blavatsky wrote things like this. The intellectual difference between the Aryan and other civilized nations and such savages as the South Sea Islanders is inexplicable on any other grounds. No amount of culture, nor generations of training amid civilization could raise such human specimens as the Bushmen, the Vedas of Ceylon, and some African tribes to the same intellectual level as the Aryans, the Semites, and the Turanians, so called. The sacred spark is missing in them, and it is they who are the only inferior races on the globe, now happily, owing to the wise adjustment of nature, whichever works in that direction, fast dying out. The Atlanteans were the race just before the Aryans, so the fourth root race. According to the theory, the Atlanteans' descendants included Native Americans, which is interesting when you think about the idea a few hundred years before that Atlantis was actually part of North America. The next evolution of race apparently hasn't happened yet, but is supposed to be starting any time now and will have certain psychic powers. Hitler and the Nazis picked up on this Aryan super race theory hard and integrated it within the Nazi propaganda and belief systems. Heinrich Himmler in particular loved the story of Atlantis and created an entire subsect of the Reich in order to study it and help evolve the theory of Aryan supremacy. All the theories of Atlantis were brought together to help buoy the Nazi Party, a massive superpower who dominated parts of the world, who were there to help raise up the inferior races and peoples with their far superior ideas, considered gods to them. It was perfect. Himmler created the House of Atlantis in 1931 in Bremen, Germany. It was the headquarters of the Nazi ideal and beliefs in the superiority of the Aryan race, and it was headed by Hermann Wirth, who believed Atlantis was in fact very real and existed only 20,000 years prior. He also believed Atlantis was the birthplace of the Aryan race. He had as part of his group a young anthropologist named Bruno Beger. His goal was to discover proof of the lost civilization in an effort to, again, provide more propaganda and belief in the right of the Nazis. He never proved the existence of Atlantis, of course, and was tried in the 1970s as a Nazi supporter who had assisted in Auschwitz. But it isn't all bad when it comes to Atlantis' influence. Pop cultures truly fell in love with the idea of Atlantis over time, and especially so in the last 60 years. This was due to the upswing in New Age philosophy, which included a new interest in aliens, reincarnation, and more thanks to books like Chariots of the Gods. Atlantis had already started showing up in films and television, books and comics. One of the most popular, of course, was Aquaman, which was become even more popular recently due to the DC movie universe, featuring him prominently and the entire underwater world which it is set in. On the small screen in 1977, Patrick Duffy would star in 4 made-for-TV movies and the short-lived TV series as the Man from Atlantis. The story followed a web-fingered and toed man with strange eyes that washes up on the beach. After he's rescued, it's discovered he can breathe underwater and has exceptional strength and speed while swimming. He's named Mark Harris because he has no memory of who he is or where he's from. He stays with his new human friends who run the Foundation for Oceanic Research. Harris's adventures tended to stick around water and were over the top when it came to villains. One major entry into the Atlantis filmography came from Disney in 2001 with Atlantis: The Lost Empire, an animated adventure set in the underwater kingdom in the year 1914. The film borrowed a bit from the live-action film Stargate, right down to the floppy-haired, glasses-wearing scholar winding up with the girl at the end. It has an all-star cast featuring Michael J. Fox, James Garner, Jim Varney, and Leonard Nimoy. It would actually have a sequel released direct-to-video in 2003, which was to be an actual series based on the film, but was shelved. Instead, the first 3 episodes were edited into the feature Atlantis: Milo's Return, which would actually have Milo and company taking on the Kraken, another water-based myth we've talked about previously. That Stargate connection shouldn't be surprising for a couple of reasons, actually. Stargate Atlantis was a massively popular TV series and spin-off from the Stargate film and original series. The base of operations for the team was in the lost city of Atlantis that was in fact on the planet Lentia, but the legend on Earth was based from what had happened there long ago and the race who built it. The series ran for 5 seasons, pretty good for a Sci-Fi Channel series. Ironically, it starred Jason Momoa, who would go on to play Aquaman as the King of Atlantis. In 2013, the BBC would produce a very short-lived series called Atlantis: The Legend Begins. The series actually combines several myths into the story of Atlantis, including Hercules, Medusa, Jason and the Argonauts, and the Minotaur. It was a total of 2 series with 25 episodes in total. The series was successful and has some familiar faces amongst its cast with Mark Addy, John Hannah, and Anna Taylor-Joy. Unfortunately, the BBC decided, due to the budget, not to continue past the 2nd season of the show and sank it into the depths of cancellation. One major player in the world of underwater exploration is James Cameron, who has actually created his own equipment in order to film underwater projects like The Abyss and Titanic. In 2017, he did a film with National Geographic called Atlantis Rising, which followed him on a search to see if there was actual proof that Atlantis existed. Cameron spoke to People magazine about the project at the time, saying, "When I'm not doing my day job as a Hollywood movie guy, I'm doing my other job as an ocean explorer." The payoff is that in the course of searching for Atlantis and exploring the possible sites, we came up with some pretty good evidence that there is in fact a ship-based trading culture outside the so-called Pillars of Hercules, which is the Strait of Gibraltar, just off the coast of Spain. That's pretty big. Cameron is a big proponent of science and ocean exploration, and while he didn't find anything that said, "Welcome to Atlantis," he and his director and partner on the project, Simcha Jagavisi, did find some compelling evidence and had an idea that is equally as compelling. Jagavisi said, "I think a lot of people, when they hear the word Atlantis, they put it in the same category as alien abduction. That is simply not the case. Somebody wrote this story down, and it's not just anybody. It was Plato, one of the most famous philosophers in history. You can't just think of Atlantis as one spot that people argue either existed or didn't exist," he added. Reading the original text very carefully, and it's amazing how many times you can read the same pages and not see it, Plato doesn't just say it's a spot. He says it's a civilization. It's an empire. If thousands of years from now somebody was looking for American civilization, it wouldn't just be about finding Manhattan. Once we realized that and started visiting places like Sardinia, there are 7,000 temples on Sardinia that more or less match Plato's description of Atlantean architecture. I was blown away. The idea that Atlantis is real and the search for definitive proof will continue. Is it real or an ideal? It's hard to say. Personally, I think Atlantis did exist, but was a culture that managed to lose itself along the way. Not one necessarily lost to the sea, but to its own greed and reach, which was the basis of Plato's story and writing. There's evidence, as we've seen, that there was a civilization that existed right where the stories say. Atlantis as an idea and goal has been taken and used for nefarious ends, as I've mentioned, for the worst of purposes. Perhaps instead it should be seen as the cautionary tale Plato intended, one that warns if you see yourself as better than your fellow man, the consequences can be severe, and even the greatest of kingdoms can be lost. Thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our Joe Blow Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company and we appreciate all of your support.